Russia's continued aggression, continued war in Ukraine, the hybrid actions that we've seen from Russia in Germany and across Europe have not played a major role in the German election, in this past election. Is this an issue? Yes. Friedrich Merz and the CSU have been more hawkish than the SPD in general in terms of support for Ukraine and giving Ukraine, especially the military assistance or more forward-leaning military assistance that it has asked for. Everyone is well familiar with the issue of the cruise missile bunker buster Taurus, where Friedrich Merz pre-election, pre-campaign was much more forward-leaning. And so I think overall this is a net positive, the most likely next German government for Kyiv, for the government, and for Ukraine's war effort.
As you mentioned, Friedrich Merz has called for the delivery of Taurus missiles, even criticized outgoing Chancellor Scholz on the issue several times. But closer to the elections, he seems to have adopted more cautious rhetoric, saying even that the delivery of Taurus missiles should be coordinated together with the US and other partners. Also, when he was asked about the possible deployment of German peacekeepers in Ukraine, he refused to discuss the issue. Do you see some discrepancies in his statement, in his rhetoric?
I think this is clearly a case where Friedrich Merz personally still believes that Ukraine should get more forward-leaning, more assertive support from Germany. I think, as we all know, political campaigns change things for politicians that want to get elected. I think everyone was well aware in the CDU of the potential vulnerabilities on the right flank, on the Eastern German, former East German public opinion, where that stands in terms of how forward-leaning, how aggressive Germany should be in terms of its support. And so I think this was a campaign time correction there, and no doubt. I also think once Friedrich Merz is now in the on track to become the next chancellor, most likely, think he will have a slightly different perspective. He will also face, or he is already facing, a dynamically and rapidly changing context, given the Trump administration's push for so-called settlement of the war and settlement between Ukraine and Russia. A very different picture in Europe, a different picture on the battlefield. And so I think all of these factors play into this slight moderation, if you wanted to put it positive or benignly, moderation of Friedrich Merz's position, especially during the campaign.
After the elections, Merz called for Europe's independence of the United States. Do you see these opinions as a result of some long-term developments, or was it simply a reaction to the events that we saw in the past 2 weeks, to the statements coming from the Trump administration?
A lot has been made of these statements of Merz calling for independence from, but to be clear, he never said sort of independence against the United States. I think to interpret this as sort of this goalless French conception of strategic autonomy, where there's always an element of against the United States, I don't think that's realistic. Friedrich Merz, his entire life, has been a committed Atlanticist. He's been also a committed European, and so he has framed this in a European framework. I think his thinking is probably a lot closer to what President Zelensky, in what I thought was a very underrated speech at the Munich Security Conference, communicated. That was sort of peace through European strength, right? Was his the nutshell, the essence of his speech at the Munich Security Conference. And I think Friedrich Merz here is doing a couple of things. I think one, his comments were clearly an emotional reaction of someone who has his entire life supported strong links with the United States, a strong US, German, and transatlantic partnership, who's gone to battle to defend that relationship in German politics many times. and then had to witness the 2 weeks preceding the election with Trump's shift on or push for that settlement, and all of the comments and statements we saw about Russia, about President Zelensky, about leaving the Europeans out, then J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, and so on. So that's one part. I think secondly, he does understand that President Trump respects strength. And this is also a way of signaling to the United States, hey, we will be looking after our interests. We are drawing lines here, and we are trying to, shift the leverage here. And we can do that through European cooperation, even if it is more medium term. And then I think, not to forget, after the election, after those statements on election night, he also gave a lengthy press conference later in the week where he said, look, we need to be prepared for the worst case scenario where the United States is not committed to Europe's security any longer, but there's still hope that it will continue to be the partner that it has been, even if the relationship is changing. So, I think we need to put these statements a little bit into context.
Do you think that Merz has the potential to become a leader in creating this stronger autonomous Europe?
Clearly, Germany has been missing in action at the European level on not just on security and defense issues, but writ large. I mean, there is a reason why the German vote, quote unquote, it has become a term where the largest economy, the most populous member state of the European Union, abstains from major legislative and regulatory votes in the council, right? The relationship that with Paris and with President Macron that has deteriorated. That's public knowledge. The sort of spats that we saw with Warsaw towards the end of the outgoing government's tenure. I think all of these things have had to change, and they have to change with the next German government. And there's a huge opportunity also for a fresh start, because there's major shift in personnel, there's a change in the political realities. And Friedrich Merz, as I said, combines two things. He is a committed Atlanticist, and he's a credible and committed European. And I think if he plays his cards right, then he can make that fresh change. And we already saw him meeting with President Macron. I very much hope that he does the same and makes a similar effort with especially the Eastern European and Nordic partners on the eastern flank. And there's potential for a fresh start here, and for Germany to take much more of a leadership role. Germany has always been cautious and hesitant to be out there by itself, but out front leading. But I think we'll have to see much more of that.
The far-right Alternative for Germany party, which has opposed military aid for Ukraine, which has criticized sanctions against Russia, effectively doubled its support in these elections. Can we draw some conclusions about the shifting opinions of the German population toward topics like Ukraine and Russia?
I think in general, we have to face the reality that anti-EU, anti-NATO, sort of pro-Russian parties, anti-establishment parties will hold about a third, just over a third, I believe, of seats in the next German Bundestag, right? If you combine the Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, that you already mentioned, with Die Linke, the left party that fared much better than many people expected it to fare. Both of these parties share that anti-EU, anti-NATO, pro-Russian sentiment overall. At the same time, Russia's continued aggression, continued war in Ukraine, the hybrid actions that we've seen from Russia in Germany and across Europe have not played a major role in the German election, in this past election. The number 1, 2, 3 issues were the economy, migration, and then the future and sustainability of social welfare systems in Germany, including pensions and other issues. Is this an issue? Yes. Has have especially the Trump administration's actions also empowered those that have always peddled anti-American narratives and anti-transatlantic, anti-European narratives. Yes, they have empowered them both on the right and the left, even if it is through counter mobilization. And so this should be the AfD and the left, AfD first and foremost, should be a major concern for all Democrats, for all mainstream Democratic parties in Germany. They should also be a concern for Kyiv, for Germany's European partners in many ways. Yes, absolutely. But did the war specifically, and did the issue of Russia's aggression specifically drive that increase in the vote? I don't think it's a major factor in this. One, but not a major factor.
Since these parties hold 1/3 of the parliament, can they use this to somehow disrupt future assistance for Ukraine or the government's effort to increase defense spending?
They would only be able, and they are already able, will be able in the next Bundestag, because the new Bundestag has not constituted itself yet. That will be another 4 or so weeks. They will have a blocking minority on constitutional amendments, because in German constitutional amendments, changes to the basic law require 2/3 majority in the Bundestag. There, the left and the AfD combined have a blocking minority. Right? That's one thing. So any changes to the debt brake that would actually allow major investments through the regular budget, that they could block, and have already indicated, at least on the AfD side, that they would do so. I think where it will get really, where we will really all have to pay a lot of attention is the boring day-to-day of parliamentary procedure. The AfD will be the largest opposition party, right? The Greens will also be minor, the next biggest, and then the left party, if we get a CDU, CSU, SPD coalition. And that means the largest opposition party by parliamentary custom, not by any written rules, but by custom, gets, for example, the chairmanship of the budget committee. Will this be again the case? Will the other parties again prevent a vice president from the AfD, which they should normally have, which under the outgoing Bundestag, all other mainstream Democratic parties, because of that so-called firewall agreement that no one will cooperate with the AfD, they just simply did not vote for a vice president of the Bundestag from the AfD, nominated by the AfD. Will we see that again? How will they use their speaking time in parliament, which as the main opposition party, they will have, preferential treatment, and so on and so forth. So I think this is where we have to watch. How will they use their power of oversight in requesting information from the government, right? We've seen some really concerning patterns there, and what type of information they've requested about Germany's support for Ukraine. And so I think it's in these rather detailed questions where we really have to pay attention. And that's much harder to do than sort of big votes or big scandals, big blocking maneuvers, right? It's in the day-to-day where I think all friends of Ukraine and all friends of democracy in Germany have to pay a lot more attention.
Some leading figures in the Trump administration, mainly Elon Musk, but also J.D. Vance, signaled support for the AfD. What risks do you foresee in this growing, let's say, alliance between the Trump's team and AfD for Ukraine and for Europe?
Yeah, I think this unprecedented interference, I think it was good that we had a strong reaction from the German government, but also from the government parties, but also from Friedrich Merz at MSC to J.D. Vance's speech that sort of was a strange approach to a German ally, to the Transatlantic Partnership more broadly, right? I think drawing some lines, but then also not panicking, but staying the course and making clear we don't interfere in your elections, you don't interfere in ours. I think drawing a very clear line and then focusing again on the main issues. That's really important. That is, how do we address Russia's aggression against Ukraine? What settlements, can there be, and how can we make sure Ukraine is at the table, but also Europe is at the table and gets to decide what that deal looks like, and so on and so forth. So I think on the one hand, this is somewhat of a distraction, right? We didn't see a major impact in the vote. Neither Elon Musk nor JD Vance's speech provided a major bump for the AfD in any shape or form. If anything, we can talk about the counter mobilization that produced on the left, right? And we saw a sort of the Die Linke, the left party, overperforming by 2 to 3% from polling. The AfD poll performed exactly where polling was, so we didn't see any effect there. I would be careful to overemphasize that. At the same time, I think it has to be made clear continuously that that's unacceptable interference in German politics or in European politics more broadly. There is a broader question about this sort of ideological internationale of the right, of the far right, that some are fearing. It's somewhat ironic because the AfD in particular, but also Die Linke, has strong anti-American tendencies in its entire sort of DNA of the two parties, right? And then to have to square that with Elon Musk's and JD Vance's support is, it's interesting. It just shows the sort of ahistorical or anti-historical context that all of this special type of relationship is forming in.
This is Martin Fernusek from the Kyiv Independent. I hope you enjoyed this interview. We are able to publish videos like this for free thanks to the support of people around the world, people like you. Consider joining our community and help us keep going. You can become a member of the Kyiv Independent just for $5 a month. Thank you.